I think this is our third full house today. I mean, can I say Galway audiences are something to behold. Interested in enlightenment and intelligent conversation and peace and harmony as opposed to blood on the floor. Take note, all our lovely panellists here. That's what they're looking for here. So, with the Labour landslide in the recent UK election, the question of a referendum on a united Ireland has re-entered the public conversation. That conversation has been considerably enhanced by the ARINS Project, that's Analysing and Researching Ireland North and South, a joint project of the Royal Irish Academy, the University of Notre Dame, or even Notre Dame, and the Irish Times. The project has commissioned independent research on constitutional, institutional and policy options for Ireland North and South, and crucially has carried out targeted polling on the issue of a united Ireland, which has revealed some surprising conclusions. The Irish Times has played a huge role in disseminating these processes and conclusions to their readership and in analysing them. Today, we have a distinguished panel, you can see them all here before you, to discuss where we might be going with this. And to moderate its discussion, we're delighted to have Dearbhail McDonald, broadcaster, journalist and commentator, with the added advantage of actually being from Northern Ireland. Which does help. Now, I'm not going to introduce the panel, she will do that, but I do need to say a very deep thank you to Brendan O'Leary, Professor Brendan O'Leary on the far end of the panel there, who has stepped in at very short notice to replace John Garry, who was supposed to be on this panel today from Queen's University, who has been stricken by the dreaded COVID, which is now transversing its way around the globe again. And we're very grateful, Brendan, for you to coming today. A very, very important part of the ARINS project is Brendan. So, Dearbhail, I will leave you to introduce the panel and moderate a very lively hour of chat. Please welcome Dearbhail McDonald and her panel.
Thank you very much.
We're gone.
Thank you very much. And can we have another round of applause for the amazing curatorial skills of Katrina Crowe, who for the last number of years, as some of you are aware, I'm something of first thoughts recidivist. I think this is my third or fourth year being back taking part in various discussions. Journalists have terrible shorthand, especially people like me who've covered courts a lot. But when Katrina called me about it and I wrote down Whither, a united Ireland, I went back and looked at my handwriting and said, did she mean Whither as in W-H-I-T-H-R, or is it Whither as in W-I-T-H-E-R? Because we obviously, Katrina and I have been discussing this for many years, but at the time there was yet another stasis in terms of parliamentary politics in Northern Ireland. We were watching with shock and awe at unfolding events across the IRC in terms of UK politics. And now we find ourselves in quite a different place. The House of Paisley, such as it had become, has fallen. We now have the adults are technically back in the room now with a committed unionist in the form of Keir Starmer, who has said that he would absolutely vote for retention of the union, and Simon Harris, who isn't perhaps as committed to having this conversation straight away. And it's really, really interesting. I have the huge privilege as a journalist who was born in Newry, County Down, but has now spent much more of her time in terms of living and working in the Republic of Ireland than I did spending time at up home in the north, is this whole question, for me, in recent times, obviously it's been aggravated by or accelerated by, depending on which way you view it, by Brexit. The one parameter that the Good Friday Belfast Agreement did not contemplate, it's all around every corner: demography, consent, identity, and possibly the one thing that it didn't contemplate was the decision by the UK to leave. But I think this debate has been informed sometimes by more heat rather than light. And when you scratch beneath the surface of it, you get to detect kind of different views to it. I'll share with you, just before I introduce the panel, just an incident that happened earlier today. I got a taxi over here to the venue. I love, all over the world when I travel, I love talking to taxi drivers. When they annoy me, I tell them I work for the Revenue Commissioners, and that usually ends the conversation. But the taxi driver asked me, a Galwegian, he said, what are you doing and where are you going? And I said, I'm moderating a debate on a United, and he said, it's never going to happen. Never going to happen. We are not going to take you, Catholic or Protestant. It's been, and I remember sitting with a familiar, because this has been increasing for me, that there has been a pushback, trespassing and a hostility in certain quarters to this debate. But it was also very, very revealing because it makes me know that this is not going to be straightforward. Thankfully, I don't have to resolve it because I have three amazing panellists, three authors whose books can be found in all good bookshops. Pat Leahy, author and political editor at the Irish Times. Brendan O'Leary, very kindly jumping in for us today, political scientist and a co-founder of the ARINS Project, which we're going to be hearing about. And Malachi O'Doherty, author of Can Ireland Be One? Give them a warm round of applause. Brendan, I'm going to begin with you. Before we get into
Before you ask your question, I'm going to say I'm the author of Making Sense of United Ireland. €10 in good book.
You mean it's remaindered already?
Yes.
You can get a signed copy, Pat.
Well, I'd list my books too, but there's 12 of them. It'd take all night.
I should also say that while we've asked you to put your mobile phones down, and please do, I do intend to give about 15 minutes for audience questions, so get going. You're going to be taking part in the debate. Brendan, before we get into the how or the what and what's come out of it, can you tell us a little bit of the why of the ARINS Project? Why was it conceived? Why did you feel it was important to get a project of this kind underway?
The ARINS Project, as you said, is a joint initiative of the Royal Irish Academy, which is a fascinating institution because it's an all-island institution, originally founded by Protestants. And one of the remarkable decisions made in the independent Ireland was not to rename it. If the Royal Irish Academy had been renamed the Irish Republican Academy, it might have had an unfortunate abbreviation.
Indeed.
So the Academy brings together professors from the north and the south across a whole range of disciplines. So it was an appropriate forum for the development of social science research on the possibility of a united Ireland and the possibility of the sustained union of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Together with the Irish Times, Patrick Griffin of the Keogh Naughton Institute at the University of Notre Dame thought it would be wise to run a new series of surveys probing in depth all the difficulties that might arise in relationship to the possibility of a united Ireland. So we began our work shortly before COVID began. I'm the chair of its Public Opinion Committee. I interact with Pat Leahy. Every year we design a whole series of new questions, sometimes experimental questions on difficult topics. I'd like to say that this year we're planning to probe in some depth people's attitudes on possible forms of the government of a united Ireland, meaning the central government. Now you may think that's presumptuous. It's the view of myself and many of my colleagues that the key work of ARINS has to be preparatory. We do not collectively think a united Ireland is going to happen in the next couple of years.
Or that it's inevitable.
Or that it's inevitable. And we do research on the assumption that both possibilities are latent, the preservation of the Union and the possibility of a united Ireland. I think until we had our project underway, most people were not aware that the fundamental institutional choice about a united Ireland is whether there is to be a unitary Irish state or a unitary state in which there would be a persisting devolved Northern Ireland. That came as a complete shock to many of our southern participants in focus groups and in our general surveys. ARINS is like the Alliance Party. ARINS is neutral on the question of the future of the Union or a future united Ireland. Personally, I'm not. I'm in favour of united Ireland, subject to a whole range of conditions. And that is the view of several of my colleagues. But we also participate with fellow scholars who are Unionists. And the idea is that we share a common commitment to common standards of evidence, debate, argument, and the use of social science techniques. So that's our origins, and I'd like to pay tribute to Pat Leahy and the Irish Times, in particular for respecting our intellectual independence and working with us even when they think we're doing crazy things.
And speaking of crazy things, Pat, what's really, really interesting, and obviously the Irish Times is playing a huge role in bringing these findings to the wider public. It's interesting because when you talk about United Ireland, on the surface there is quite a high level of support. And then when you get into issues such as cost, flags, emblems, what kind of United Ireland, people's assumptions, even that idea hasn't really fully perhaps been articulated. And I'm just interested, what is it telling us about us so far, in your view?
I mean, I suppose you could look at the results, and we've done it for the last 2 years. As Brendan says, we'll shortly be embarking on another round of it, which we hope will be published towards the end of the year, unless elections and things like that delay us. But I suppose if you take the research that we've published so far in the round, and to take a helicopter view of it, you would say that, well, we knew that, didn't we? We know that there's a majority in the north that would vote in the morning against unification. And we know that there's an overwhelming majority in the south, nearly 2/3 of majority in the south, who say, just 16% or so against in the south, who say that they would vote for unity. But actually, when you start probing those positions, and the research in the north is conducted in separately and independently, though in almost all respects it's identical, you begin to see some interesting things going on underneath. So there are unionists and people from a Protestant background who are engaging with the question and have an openness to engaging with it. Interestingly, a majority of people in the north, though if there was a referendum in the morning, the status quo would be voted for, a majority of people in the north want there to be a referendum, as do a majority of people in the south. There are some unionists in the north who refuse to have any engagement with it, and this is
because their fear is that to even engage with it is to drag them onto the floor of that inevitability, that fear that they have. Even
more than that, I mean, that in some respects is a rational response, but what Brendan in particular identified in the research was the problem of losers' consent, as he termed it, that there was a substantial minority of unionists who would find it almost impossible to accept the result of a referendum if it went against them. Now, that was almost a third, a little over 30%,
32%.
First year, and then it came down a little bit next year. So it'll be interesting. Last year,
it came down to 22.
But I even struggle with language like losers' consent. You know, if we're really if the whole goal is a shared island, as the late Seamus Mallon and others would say, the only thing that hasn't changed in the last 400 years that we're still neighbours. But there is a reality, Malachi, is there not, that in whatever we call it, a shared island, a united Ireland, whatever way that breaks down in terms of governments and infrastructure and how we organise it, there will be 1 million plus people on this island who are British or who identify as British, who have a strong identity. And sometimes it feels as if we nearly expect them just to be an annex, to be an add-on. But that's going to be a significant minority. To what part do you think demography is playing its role?
Well, demography is playing a role, but essentially, and probably the figure of the 1 million Ulster Protestants who would resist everything is probably too high now as well. But I have doubts about people who are concerned for a united Ireland. They want to end partition on the island of Ireland, but they're not particularly concerned to end partition in Belfast. Belfast is a divided city with peace walls which segregate Catholic and Protestant communities. Catholic and Protestant communities have separate schools. They are catered for by housing policy, which keeps them apart. So essentially,
and this is borne out in the statistics. More than 9 out of 10 school children in Northern Ireland attend segregated schools, and the division of socialising in particular. Is
9% attend integrated schools. Very large numbers, I think close to 60%, say that they would like to use integrated schools. But essentially, the underlying problem to integrating education is the territorial division. Housing estates tend to be more or less 99% Protestant or Catholic. Housing development that might bleed from one community into another is inhibited by the peace walls. the Good Friday Agreement never really catered for how you might heal the divisions within that society. And these are enormous divisions. These are enormous divisions. So, for instance, in 2014, there was a shared island or a shared future document in which there was a discussion on when we might bring these walls down. And a date was set for taking down the peace walls in Northern Ireland. That date was 2023. The peace walls stand. No one is agitating for them to be brought down. No political party is standing up and saying, we want the walls down, we want these communities to interact more with each other. There is quite considerable interaction. Like the border across the island, it's a porous border. I can go across to the Shankill Road or from the Shankill to the Falls anytime I like, but there will be trouble occasionally and the gates will be closed and people will be kept apart. And primarily the most toxic effect of the peace walls is the prevention of the expansion of housing. So you get further concentration of Catholic and Protestant in their own areas. And where you get housing developments forming, which are mixed, you do get attacks, now mostly by loyalists on Catholics to drive them out. And that's been in the news even in the last 2 weeks as something that happens. Political parties organise on sectarian lines. Sinn Féin is a Catholic party. Now, that's not to say it's a theologically Catholic party. Let's use the word Catholic with a small c. But everybody who votes for Sinn Féin went to a Catholic school, was baptised a Catholic, and lives within those areas which are definably Catholic areas, distinct from definably Protestant areas. And the same is true of the Unionist parties. Now, there's a problem. There's a division which is really serious, which is affecting the further development, which is even integrated into the Good Friday Agreement itself, whereby political parties must designate as nationalist or unionist.
But Malachi, if that, of course, it suits political parties at the north at the minute to have to walk in and say one or the other. The fastest growing population in Northern Ireland are those people that were not for that. That third way would block through. I want to do a quick straw poll. I can barely see you. We might even flash the lights up. I just want to do a quick straw poll, and day trips don't count. How many of you people have been to Northern Ireland, feel that they know it, and have spent substantial time there?
Yep.
There you are.
Because, and the reason why I ask it, Brendan, I want to come back in, is that, I remember interviewing Bertie Ahern for a BBC broadcast, and I was saying to him, where will the biggest challenge be? Will the biggest challenge be when it comes to this question? And interestingly, at the time of the Good Friday Agreement, they thought that the whole question, the first border poll, could have happened within 10 or 15 years, which I actually could never have imagined. But I asked him, will the biggest challenge for a poll be in the north or in the south? And he said the biggest challenge would be on the south of the border. How we in the south of the border would react to it. And I'm just wondering what your views on that are, or what ARINS is telling us about that, including the don't knows or perhaps the not sures.
Well, it's absolutely true, as Malachi says, that Northern Ireland remains a deeply divided place. But it has been deeply divided in that location since the early 19th century. So it hasn't mattered whether it's been united inside the United Kingdom or part of a partitioned island.
It matters for me, like one brief point.
Let me finish, please.
Just let him finish and then
it's been a partitioned city internally with deep ethno-national and sectarian divisions. That's a constant. The Good Friday Agreement allows for opportunities to change that. It allows for power sharing within the north, across the island, and interaction with Great Britain as well. And it also allows for the possibility of a united Ireland achieved by 2 referendums, north and south. And what we know from the ARINS research is, as Pat Leahy told you, a 2/3 majority in the Republic favour unification. There's a significant proportion of don't knows, but they remarkably resemble in all of their responses those who favour a united Ireland. And in relation directly to your question, they have difficulties with the idea of symbolic transformations of their state. They do not like the idea of rejoining the Commonwealth. They do not like the idea of changing the flag or the anthem. But they are flexible on important matters, like, for example, willingness to see a certain proportion of budgetary surpluses transferred to a sovereign wealth fund dedicated to the task of accomplishing a united Ireland. They are more flexible than we might have imagined on the question of whether there should be persisting devolution inside a united Ireland. We're going to test their willingness to accept certain kinds of institutional transformation. And we know from last year that they're quite willing to entertain some ideas about transforming the presidency and transforming the Senate. This year, we intend to target the government of United Ireland, and this is partly directly related to Malachi's question. We're going to ask them, we'll describe the system of government in the Republic of Ireland. It's the result of a multi-party coalition after proportional representation elections. Would you like that in a united Ireland? Would you like the northern system brought down south with the party designations, with vetoes, with strong cross-community consent provisions? Do you like that? If you don't like that, are you willing to entertain compromise options which create special provisions for British and Protestant identifiers in a united Ireland? I don't know what the responses are going to be on those questions. I'm looking forward to analysing them. There will be a separate question, which is independent of the question of British and Protestant integration into a possible united Ireland. And that's the question of how Northerners as a whole are treated, Nordies, as they're sometimes abusively called. And we'll be probing the question of whether Southerners are happy with the idea that 4 out of 15 cabinet ministers will be from the north in a united Ireland, if that occurs through normal processes of party bargaining, or if it occurs as a result of a guaranteed quota. So we're going to be exploring all those kinds of options. What I think is clear is that Southerners generally have in their heads a model of a united Ireland premised on the idea of 32 counties, the disappearance of the north becoming part of the south. But a substantial proportion of the population is willing to accept the idea that there will have to be distinct accommodations. One of the particular pieces of ignorance is on the question of citizenship. The Good Friday Agreement allows for people to be British or Irish citizens, or both. Many Southerners seem to be unaware of this. They're very unhappy with the idea that in a united Ireland, some people would remain British citizens only. That would be disadvantageous for them because they couldn't vote for the president, they couldn't vote for constitutional amendments unless there were changes to the constitution. But nevertheless, it means that there's a strong sense that Irish unification means imposing Irishness on British people.
And that's an important thing. A couple of years ago, Pat, I wrote a piece when I was business editor of the independent group for The Guardian. And in it, I was just talking about, for me, someone who'd lived half of my life in conflict, the rest in peace, about what the Good Friday Agreement had done. And I think had a line in it which said, it allows people like me, a Catholic nationalist from Northern Ireland, to be able to say I'm Irish British in the same way as somebody else calls them Irish American. The phone calls I got afterwards, the concern. Are you okay? You just said, and I was going to know, I didn't say. I was just saying this is what it permits and what it allows. And for us who grew up during that conflict, that whole notion that identity had been, that we'd room sort of to grow with that. I'm just wondering, Pat, that whole question of identity, if we leave the pragmatics aside, cost, everything, I'm sure we're going to get to that shortly, is that where some of the sticking points are, do you think? Is that what the research is telling us, that we're still seen as the other, the Nordies, those ones up there? Anyone who read a good piece in the Irish Times recently will have seen students from Northern Ireland writing about their experience of still being othered.
I think
25 years later.
I think it is certainly true that partition, no matter what you may think of it, has become an established fact. I was interested in your show of hands earlier.
That's what I asked,
we touched on those subjects in the first year of the research, and what we found was that there was a large number of people in the south who had very little to do with the north. And while for in terms of ever having visited there, having relatives there, and so forth. And while there's no doubt that support for United Ireland in the south is a mile wide, I wonder if in parts it isn't an inch deep. And again, it was one of the things that that came across in the research that we did, the extent to which most people have they thought of, if they have thought of unity in the south at all, have a simply integrationist model of it, in the sense that, I remember there was one of the guys told us in a focus group, you know, he was asked some questions about the sort of the models that might apply, and he just said, well, look, I just thought they'd just join us and that'll be it. And if you think about it, what the Good Friday Agreement says is that there shall be a referendum in the north called by the British Secretary of State for Northern Ireland when he and it uses the term he, when he thinks it's likely to pass. So I've always thought, if you think of it, given the reluctance, the presumed reluctance of a British government to hold a referendum in the first place, that a referendum in the north will only be held when it looks almost certain to pass. It's
really
not
likely.
I think it's not
Really
going to be a finger in the air. Now, if that is the case, and you know, we can go on to talk about the criterion by which that
Likely to pass where?
if it is likely to pass, if it's only held when it's really likely to pass in the north, then in some respects the big question isn't about the north. It's about the south. And such research as we have done over the last couple of years suggests to me that actually people in the north are probably a lot farther down the line in considering what a united Ireland might mean for them, because I detect almost none of it in the south. And I'll finish on this, and particularly aside altogether from the specific concerns that we might go on to talk about, on the general proposition that if there is to be a united Ireland, then that political entity will have to be a bit more British than the current 26 county political entity. But even to go that far, it seems to me, for a lot of people in the south, is a bridge too far.
Can I bring Malachi in on this? Because arguably, Malachi, what's happening right across the world, and particularly where we've moved towards the right, the far right, and even worse, when you look at what's happening, Brexit arguably was an identity crisis, or a crisis of identity. You could argue what's happening in Trump and J.D. Vance's America is of identity all across Europe. And when I speak, as I'm sure you do, to many people from the Protestant Unionist loyalist tradition, a lot of them say, look, pragmatically, for social reasons, for economic reasons, for everything else, we know that this makes sense. But I just hate having, the way people describe to me is, I hate having my nose rubbed in it. And I hate, you know, and I wonder, where is my place in this shared island? Leaving aside, by the way, the 20% of workers in the Republic of Ireland who were not born here. That's going to be an interesting dynamic,
well, that's another
if we ever get
dynamic.
to that. But that whole question, I suppose, maybe the heart and soul piece, Malachi, about identity and accommodating each other so that we don't have, which is what I think what some people here fear, is the troubles in reverse, that actually the birth of a united Ireland, if not managed well, could be accompanied by violence for those who feel that their identity and their traditions, particularly for unionism, that may feel that there's no place for them, especially when the UK doesn't seem to particularly love them either.
Well, this is the point I was trying to make. If you have Northern Ireland as a chronically divided society, albeit with some movement away from that division, but still geographically and territorially, through education, through culture, through political party organisation and all of that, then the question for people in the south is, are you happy to take that on? I mean, every year we have these massive problems around sectarian bonfires. I mean, just last week, for instance, on the 11th night, you get this competition among loyalist communities to build the highest bonfire tower. And what happens is the fire brigade, the fire and rescue service, attend those fires. And you know what they do when they attend those fires? They hose down the houses nearby so that they won't catch alight. What we have got in Northern Ireland is a very sensitized but very careful management of sectarian division in the hope of preventing loss of life and major violent outbreaks. That is part of our normal there, right? Now, do you want that? Do you want to take that off the British and the Northern Ireland Assembly and manage it instead? Because that is the question we would be talking about today if we were talking about voting on a united Ireland tomorrow, right?
Well, as we're learning, Malachi, such displays of public protest are not unique to Northern Ireland when we look to events in Dublin at present. Can I ask you all, easy question before I go to the audience. Jack, we started at 5 past, so I'm going to take my 5 minutes back. Hashtag just saying. So let's go to the really... the question actually maybe in a sense nobody can really ask because the variables have yet to be determined. Brendan, the cost of a united Ireland, increasingly the pushback that I receive is Northern Ireland, we can't afford it, it's a welfare state, it's unproductive, and nowhere are we going to take away from our economic gains by bringing on that. It'll be a mill around our neck, which hurts when you come from there. But notwithstanding all of those things, you know, you're looking at, will the British pay the pensions or not? What are going to be the variables? Will there be another peace and stability fund? Will there be a sovereign wealth fund? But the issue of cost, I am predicting, is going to be one of those very contentious areas in due course. Would you pay $1,500 to $2,000 a year?
In what currency?
Exactly.
So most of the arguments on economics are incompetently developed and incompetently pursued. There are two separate questions. One is the question of what is the existing British subvention of Northern Ireland. It is much exaggerated because the figures rely on using overall UK public expenditure per head across the whole of the UK, and they impute a figure for Northern Ireland.
And doesn't count what Northern Ireland gives back?
Can I finish?
Yeah.
So a great deal of British defence expenditure takes place in Great Britain and in British bases outside these islands. This would not occur in a united Ireland. Pensions, I am a UK state pensioner. I receive my pension even though I live in the United States from the UK government because I made national insurance contributions. The UK will pay the pensions of British citizens, and they will be British citizens under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement. So pensions are not a fundamental issue.
Does that mean they'll pay a Protestant's pension, but they'll not pay mine?
I
mean, that's what you seem to be saying.
No, you are the equivalent of a British citizen from the point of view of
Irish
British
passport. I was born in Donegal.
And you have all of that, but you paid national insurance contributions, right? Therefore, you are entitled to your British pension.
So it's the contributions that count rather than the national identity?
It's the contributions that count.
Not citizenship.
And that is the way most countries' pension systems operate. Now, there are a whole range of items in the subvention that I could go through at some length. Let me finish. The simple point is that the amount of revenue taken from Northern Ireland is underestimated in current figures because people report VAT to headquarters in London. The amount of expenditure actually incurred by the UK in Northern Ireland is exaggerated. And the amount of subsequent public expenditure that would be required in the United Ireland is exaggerated. But fundamentally, these questions don't really matter. They're relatively speaking rounding errors. What really matters is to ask the question, what would happen to the northern economy if it was attached to the more dynamic southern economy, as opposed to being
but
shackled,
also it's public finance.
I'm nearly finished. Shackled to a corpse. Which is this is what the Brexiteers used to say about Great Britain, being shackled to the corpse of the European Union.
Stormers
it's
going
now
for growth.
appropriate to say that Northern Ireland is shackled to Great Britain, which has made a decision to leave the European Union, which is its nearest and greatest market. It's damaged itself from the point of view of inward investment. It's very difficult to see how it's going to grow.
So I just want to bring Pat in because that is an entire hour of a debate, if not more. Pat,
one last statement. Any rational assessment would imply that for the North, the advantages of unification are dramatic and considerable.
But Pat Leahy,
will the South pay for them? The South pays for Galway. Galway is subsidised by everything inside the M50.
Brendan, I'm going to have to cut you off there because Pat Leahy, there is going to be a question. Rationality may go out the window. There is going to be a question. Will the South pay for the North? Will we be willing to pay social welfare rates or other rates that brings the quality of living that people enjoy in the South up to that? It will become an issue? What do you think about the issue of cost?
I think it will become a massive issue. I mean, one could take issue with a number of the things that Brendan said there.
I don't have time.
The most shocking of them would be that he's old enough to receive a pension, which appearances would certainly
I worked hard for it.
Would certainly be like. I do think there will be a huge issue of that, even if you leave aside for a moment the cost of the subvention. There's the standard of living and wages in Northern Ireland, which is very far below what we have here. And if that cost was to come immediately onto the Southern Exchequer, then it would be substantial. I think that voters in the South, and if we're talking about the Southern referendum for now, I think will be wary of any analysis that says, don't worry, we'll be able to afford it. I think there will have to be...
I didn't say that.
I know you didn't. No. But but let me finish. If I may. I think that I agree with you that at least some of the economic analysis that has been done has not been sufficiently robust, rigorous, thorough, or far-sighted. And I think that there will really be an onus on the Irish government at some stage to do meaningful figures on what the likely range of
like they did after
costs,
Brexit, like they mapped it out.
And I think that this gets to the heart of one of the difficulties in the whole debate, and one of the things, hopefully, that our joint project can help alleviate, which is that a lot of the arguments and some of the analysis that seeks to back up those arguments is done from a partial position. It is done to achieve, the analysis is done to achieve a debating point rather than to get at the truth.
And Malachi, I want to bring you in there, because earlier this week the Joint Oireachtas Committee said, we need to start preparing for this immediately, but they targeted certain areas like welfare, education, health, Malachi, and in a sense that's what the Shared Island has been doing, trying to map out those areas. On that question of cost, because there will be certain things that people will hang on to. What are your views on the question of cost and how we quantify it?
First of all, I am a pensioner also. And my pension would be higher if I was living in Galway than it is in Belfast. So the question for me will also be whether I would be getting my pension at the Irish rate or at the British rate.
No, you didn't make contributions.
I did, not within, well, it would all be Ireland. Okay, take your point. But let's be realistic about this. We're not talking about something that's going to happen, I think, for at least about 15 years, right? So the economy will change. We may have, I was at a conference, one of the Shared Island conferences, actually in Dublin Castle, where somebody put forward the idea that within 10 or 15 years, Ireland might be the Saudi Arabia of Europe, with wind farms from the west selling energy. There was an article in The Economist.
And of course, there was a time when Belfast was one of the richest capitals on the continent of Europe.
Britain has left the European Union. Britain may dive bomb into penury and we'll all be scrambling like rats to get aboard the ship of the Irish Republic and be very happy to do so. But the other possibility is that Britain will rise up again and Britain's economy will recover.
And one possibility we haven't considered is that...
Russia. We haven't thought about Russia yet at all.
Or
China.
Or that, it could be United Ireland, it could be a different thing, or people might just try and keep the status quo for now. I'm going to ask Jack, can you bring up the lights, please? We're going to go to the audience, and I have a request. As a recovering legal affairs editor, I attended a lot of legal conferences in my time, and every time it came to the questions and answers, the lawyers, the barristers could not resist giving a 15-minute legal submission. To accommodate all of your questions and as many as possible, could you please just have some direct questions that we can get flying through, and we're going to have about hopefully 10 to 15 minutes for this. So I have two roving mics, and I'm anticipating we're going to have more than one or two questions. We're going to start with this lady at the back, and hold your hand up high as well, and after that we're going to have this gentleman here in the front, and thank you for your contributions.
I was in London. I lived in London for the last year and a half, and I was at a play called The Ulster American, which many people probably don't know, but it was quite bad tone. And essentially there was this English man saying to this very staunch Ulster Unionist, well, you're not British, you're Irish. And I think that the general feel in the UK is that everyone in Northern Ireland is Irish and that they really are not attached to it as a part of the union, despite everything that Keir Starmer is saying. So I guess the question to the panel is, how tightly do you think the UK would actually hold on if it came to it? Because I'm not sure they would.
Okay, that is great. I'm going to take another question from just down here, and then I'll go just to make best use of our time. Was there a gentleman I spotted down here? If we just get, as we get our panel thinking about that one.
We were just talking earlier about the cost there and the subvention, and I think a lot of that will depend on the negotiations between the Irish government and the British government. But it just seems to me that the Irish government will be in a very weak position, and kind of related to the other question, that Britain doesn't really care about United Ireland, whereas Ireland is very important for most Irish people. So hypothetically, if, say, the British government said, we'll only have United Ireland if you pay the full subvention, you take over all the pension liabilities, I can't see the Irish government, especially if Sinn Féin was in government, walking away from that. And I think as a result, we could end up getting a very bad deal just because Sinn Féin, based on their ideology, I mean, they have to say yes to United Ireland. They can't say no. They couldn't really walk away.
And yet many of their supporters were calling for a hard border recently during the migration debate. The two questions are related. Pat Leahy, I'm going to start with you, which is particularly around the Brexit campaign. There were a lot of surveys, and kind of sometimes when the British people were asked, is it as close as Finchley? A lot of them kind of said, well, look, if it came to it, we don't mind losing Northern Ireland. But that sense, and here's where I have a lot of empathy for people from the PUL tradition, in that they have a very strong sense of the union, of being part of the union. And yet a lot of those polls at the time kind of just said, you're way down the list of our considerations. So just to answer kind of that question, again, I suppose it goes back to identity.
I agree. And I'm not sure it matters an awful lot in the actual counting of the votes on the referendums. But in a way, like, there's kind of two questions. Is there going to be a United Ireland? And then if there is, how do you make a success about it? And in some respects, obviously they're not completely separate, but it strikes me that the people who are promoting a United Ireland and arguing for it will have to take account in the course of that long campaign of the sort of kind of psychological orphaning that unionism faces. And that will be important for some people and to dwell, but just to mention, to go back to the question of losers' consent, because that would very clearly, if there was a largish rump of disaffected, hardline loyalists who were brought into a new state against their wishes, many of whom may have a history or a family tradition of violence, like, that is a real issue for that new state. And I think, we've had a lot of experience of referendums in this country, and we know there are good ways to have referendums and bad ways to have referendums. And I hope, if and when this referendum comes, that it will be a good referendum, and that requires preparation. But it also requires, and I'll finish on this, it also requires something that is often missing in politics, which is the recognition that people of good faith can disagree. And I hope we see that in the...
Brendan, can I bring you in just on this question that the gentleman asked? As with the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, even the name of it, we have to do you think there's going to be a big multilateral kind of a drive, European Union, the US government or others, shepherding the main parties towards the difficult maybe questions of costs and how it is all kind of divvied up to prevent maybe kind of ideological rise at that time? And do we need to prepare the ground for that?
Certainly there has to be adequate preparation. In relationship to the specific question asked, I think your assessment of Ireland's bargaining position is misconceived, because in the circumstances of a referendum passing for Irish unification, the debt of the United Kingdom legally is the United Kingdom's debt. There is no provision in the Good Friday Agreement which says Irish unification subject to debt negotiations. The pattern in international law is very clear here. The successor state, which is the United Kingdom, holds the debt of the United Kingdom. If the Irish government, in an act of absurd and unnecessary generosity, decided it wanted to accept some of Northern Ireland's imputed debt, it could do so, but there would be no obligation on it to do so. It's not like 1921 when Ireland was negotiating its independence and was weak. And it's not like the Scottish referendum in 2014 where the SNP was desperate to have a referendum and therefore accepted all sorts of conditions imposed by London. So I think the bargaining circumstances will be quite different. Take the Soviet Union. When it broke up, Russia took the entire debt of the Soviet Union. Why? Not out of an act of generosity. It wanted to be the successor state and it wanted to ensure it had the Russian place on the UN Security Council. The position will be the same for the United Kingdom.
Can I take in a few more questions
Well,
before? As Malachi jumps in, just let me see how many more. I've got 1, 2 on this side and down here. Malachi.
It is interesting that there were 2 British prime ministers in my lifetime and during the early Troubles period who wanted a united Ireland and declared firmly for it. One of them was Harold Wilson, Labour Prime Minister. He wasn't Prime Minister at the time that he put forward the argument, but he met with the IRA leadership and he discussed it with them and he put forward a proposal that the British should simply announce that they were going to go in 15 years' time. When he became Prime Minister after that, he didn't follow through on that. But we understand that was his deep conviction. The other was Sir Alec Douglas-Hume, who was Foreign and Commonwealth Minister at the time of direct rule in Northern Ireland when that was introduced in the end of March, April 1972. And he wrote to Heath, the Prime Minister, and he said, if we're taking direct rule, we're going to get this place off our hands as quickly as we can. So instead of going for some kind of revised devolution or for direct rule, we should be putting all our efforts into getting a united Ireland within 6 months. So that British eagerness to be done with a place that you refer to, there is some reality in that. On Brendan's thinking about pensions, I'm still not clear.
You're getting one.
He's very worried about his pension. I have various pension consultants sitting here. I can deal with
I'm still not clear how what you're describing doesn't leave us with 2 different pension rates, an Irish state pension and a British state pension.
Before we get into
I can answer the question
very quickly.
Yeah. So on the appointed day, people in the north will get their pensions according to their contributions. Those who are in mid-career, they will start a new Irish pension and will get, at the end, a certain British pension, depending on their contributions.
So I'll be a second-class citizen for...
No, you won't be a second-class. You will have your contributions from your British pension. You're not going to get an extra pension from being a United Ireland.
Okay, so I will be getting a lower...
I'm going to get on to my accountant for those couple of years I was working at home. Okay, there are two people who have a question up at the back, and then I have this gentleman down here. So let me just go up. I'm going to take all 3 together and assign...
While you're getting the question, the lady up here asked a question about the relationship with the UK. It is a loveless marriage, but do not underestimate the affection in England and among political parties for the union with Scotland. And that's the complicated question that will face us ahead.
Which appears
they
to
will be worried about allowing
a little bit time.
Northern Ireland referendum.
2 questions up here and then this gentleman down here. So does somebody got one hand? Yes.
You talk about United Ireland under Ireland. For me, I'm obviously British. I'm proud to be British. Do you talk about it as United Ireland under Westminster? Is it better for Ireland that way?
Ooh, let's go to, there was a question behind you. Oh, United, okay. Interesting. This gentleman here.
When the UK left the EU, they basically didn't have a plan other than let's get out. How much of all these important questions do you think can be discussed prior to a referendum in Northern Ireland on a united Ireland? And will it be difficult to get a unionist party to the table before a referendum has been called? Would the community see that as maybe a betrayal of their values? Like how much this can be decided?
Excellent, very, very philosophical. Go and go to this gentleman here.
Yeah, my point is it all gets back to integration in the schools. So with a question mark after it, there will be no progress without integration in the schools. And I don't see that happening even in the long term.
The danger is we can have the vote anyway.
Pardon?
The danger is we can have the vote anyway. Pat was saying we'd hope for a good referendum. That prospect doesn't exist. The Good Friday Agreement has determined it will be a Brexit-style referendum. 50% plus one carries the day.
And may we remind the public that more than 9 out of 10 primary schools in the Republic of Ireland are Catholic maintained. We have our own very sort of unique form of...
95% of the population is Catholic, that's the problem.
But not 95% now. When you look at the percentage of workers, in the Republic of Ireland who weren't born here, I'm going to just maybe... I suppose there's a couple of themes that keep coming up, Pat, when we start getting into the weeds of it. There is identity and how do we engage the Unionist population in Northern Ireland so that they don't feel betrayed. How do we make them feel part of this debate? And also the question, which we haven't really looked at, but I suppose maybe beyond political nerds such as yourself, as in what would the governance look like, of that?
I'll take that as a compliment. But
I don't know, it's a big compliment. I wanted to go to the young person on the panel,
the non-pensioner.
To the young person on the panel.
Away
He's the one who's paying for our pensions.
Well, then you can pay for the drink, right? What was the question again?
The question was a really interesting question about which the gentleman asked, essentially about the governance. The political, what way the institutions would be formed.
There's going to obviously have to be decisions made about the governance after a referendum, and in fact,
Before.
There is an argument for saying that you have a referendum in principle, which is the one that there's no preparation for in terms of people, choosing those forms of governance. And then if that is passed in both jurisdictions, then you have a decade to work it out. And you have some sort of a process, referendums or whatever, at the end of that process. Or maybe not a decade, maybe it only takes 5 years or 7 years. But I don't see, without some sort of mechanism like that, I don't see how you get over the difficulty of people not knowing what they are voting for.
Malachi, can I just bring in on that? Limerick has just elected its first mayor. Cork has been inching for independence since the beginning of time. Is a United Ireland that has a standalone Ireland within an Ireland sort of governance in the 6 counties, is that a United Ireland?
We will have an Irish Donbass. The thing that people are overlooking about the Protestant population, like the Catholic population in Northern Ireland, as I said before, is it is territorial. It holds housing estates. There are housing estates, there are towns that are 100% nearly of one community. So it will, there's this argument that, they'll mix in, they'll blend, they'll have representation in the Dáil and they'll be so happy with that. They'll even have more power within a United Ireland than they would have within the United Kingdom proportionately. But they will hold territory. They can refuse to let the police in. They can establish no-go areas. Mary Lou McDonald was asked what about Irish language, compulsory Irish language in schools, and she said, they're queuing up to learn it. It's total bunkum. They're not queuing up to learn it. There's certainly a small, wonderful minority who do. You will be faced with a territorial lump, which is definably basically from just east of the city of Derry, down through part of Tyrone and taken in Down and Antrim, which will be able to say, we are the Irish Donbass, we are the Protestant Unionist territory, and you will have to deal with us in some way.
So for those who haven't read the book, brilliant question, can Ireland be one?
Well, I would rather see efforts made to ameliorate sectarianism first, but I don't see that being possible because it would take too long, and I think we are faced into a referendum probably in about 15 years. It'll be carried by one, and we will then be into this awful situation of a substantial Protestant population refusing assimilation into the Irish state. I think that's what we're headed towards.
I have time for one more very rapid round.
This is exactly why ARINS exists.
Yeah.
To give detailed, careful consideration in advance to deal with all of these potential questions, including the so-called Irish Donbass. There won't be an Irish Donbass. There is no Russia ready
But
to
are we
arm
being, I wonder, are we being
the insurrection
overly
going
negative
through.
as well? Because there's already superb collaboration in terms of healthcare. If a child is sick in Donegal, they can be treated in Belfast. We already have great collaboration culturally, which is where I think it all begins. You know, are we being overly negative? I wonder. I want to take that's because I'm one of those Northerners. This lady here.
Hi, sorry, this is an odd one. What about connectivity? During COVID, if we all recall, you couldn't get in and out of Ireland, and I know a lot of people were damn glad to be able to come in through the north. So has anybody factored that into the equation?
So connectivity in terms of obviously still the main airport for the island of Ireland.
Access
is
in
Dublin,
and out of Ireland.
but
closed.
connectivity infrastructure, like part of what the shared island speaks to is developing those links, whether it's waterways, whether it's the fabulous new bridge we're going to get at Narrow Water. Pat Leahy finally will be able to cross from the Cooley Mountains into the Mourne Mountains. But
I can tell you're excited about that.
I am very excited about that. But the potential of what's known as the Dublin-Belfast economic corridor. Like, I mean, if you look at house prices outside of North Dublin, moving up towards Dundalk and Louth and where I'm from, Newry, and the house prices already, even with the housing crisis generally, the potential, even if it isn't united purely in political governance, surely there's a huge potential for all of the island.
I think that is actually what the Shared Island programme is about. And in a way, it underlines a question that, had we been having this discussion before the local and European elections, I suspect it would have been a very different one and would have looked forward to the possibility of a Sinn Féin government in the south. Because, of course, and it's something we haven't really discussed, it's the choices of political leaders that we elect and that are elected in the north. What they do matters, and what they choose to do matters. I did an interview with Micheál Martin at the very start of the Shared Island thing, when it was just an idea he was putting out. And I asked him, is this a sort of a long pathway to a united Ireland, or is it the cooperation an end in itself? And he kind of went and looked at his shoes in a way that suggested to me, which he didn't say on the record, but I spoke to him subsequently.
Of course, the British feared that that's exactly what it was.
Yeah,
it was a
stalking
horse.
His answer essentially was, it's a bit of both, really, you know. And that's not, I think, an ignoble approach. And I think it is one that certainly seems to be have attracted a greater degree of comfort from Unionists than other approaches.
Maybe you should come back next year and discuss joint authority as an option.
Joint authority cost. Well, and look, and these are the issues to be teased out. I suppose for me, I suppose maybe the great tragedy of partition it is like Pat has said, it's become a fact, whether you agree with it or not, or like it or not, it sort of has become a bit of a fact. But there are so many issues that we could talk about today. I'm going to end by stealing a line from, was anyone at the Marina Carr talk earlier? Yeah. The amazing Marina Carr talk earlier. And although she wasn't talking about a political context per se, there was a line which she said, which I scribbled down because I thought she was right. She was talking about, I suppose, the role of women, particularly after independence, and how we still haven't mapped out where women are, how women are perceived. But she said something which really struck me for this debate. She says, we're trying to dig ourselves out of the binaries. And it struck me that for this conversation, that was something that's very, very relevant, that we're still trying to dig ourselves out of the binaries, whether it is PUL versus, the Catholic tradition or nationalist tradition, was it CNR versus PUL, whether it's north and south, east and west. There are these binaries, I think, that still need to be worked through before we can get to some of the solutions. But I'll go back to my MP, the late great Seamus Mallon, where I said earlier on, the one thing he did say was that the one thing that has not changed in the last 400 years, and I suspect for the next 400 years, is that we're neighbours and we have to find a way.
We're stuck with each other.
But we're still neighbours, and there's still good people who can find a way. And with that, thank you once again, Katrina, but thank you to you as well for your participation, and we wish you all the best for the rest of the festival. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Malachi.